Hello and welcome to Getting Started with Macs Session 1. Here we can see the PDF for this week's session available to download from our site. Let's move over to the second slide. We can see here the learning outcomes for today's session. So by the end of this session, a successful student should be able to identify key elements of the Macs interface. So we're going to look at some classic Macs techniques via exploring the user interface with the software. This includes aspects like the patcher window, the toolbar, the sidebar and the inspector. We're then going to create objects and route patch cables and see the different types of objects that are available in the Macs landscape and how we can actually route those together with virtual cables. We're then going to configure object properties via the inspector, which represents a very important part of the workflow in Macs to be able to customize objects to do different functions. Finally, we're going to locate and utilize the Macs help system, which is one of the best learning resources to teach yourself Macs outside a class like this. Let's move on to our third slide. We can see each of our learning outcomes is associated with a study topic. So these represent the study topics or chapters we'll look at through today's session. The first is the Macs interface. We're then going to move through to creating objects and patching, then the inspector, and finally the Macs help system. So let's get started. Our first activity today begins on page 4 of the slides, and this is a very simple, quick audio test just to make sure everybody following along with this course can actually get some sound out of Macs. And along the way, we're going to learn some interesting properties of configuring Macs for audio playback. So let's launch Macs and visit File, New Patcher. We can see here I have a patcher window already loaded. I could make a new one from the File menu, New Patcher, or alternatively use the key command Command-N, Control-N on Windows. So we can resize the patcher, we can pick it up in the corner, much like any software, and adjust its position, adjust its window, or make it full screen. So our second section of this activity is in our slides on page 5, and this is to locate the Objects button on the left toolbar and click to open it. So as we can see in Macs in the patcher, there are many different icons that live around the toolbar. You can hover over each of these icons and a pop-up window appears, giving you some insight into what the icon represents. So for example, the second icon down is the file browser, the third is the objects pane, the fourth is audio. So each of these represent a different window that can pop up from the left or right side of the toolbar. For example, the audio button opens up a list of all the audio files that have been installed by the installation of Macs. So these should exist in every installation of Macs on Windows and Mac. We've also got other interesting icons down here, such as plugins, which will give us every single VST or audio unit plugin on your system. We've got aspects like Visual, which is a graphical DJ application based on jitter. We also have Beep, which is a software synthesis tool. So in summary, all of these icons can provide different functionality to allow you to quickly access different parts of the software. Again, across the top of the patcher, at the top, we have a format button that allows you to configure color schemes for different objects and parts of your patch. We have a magnification zoom in the top left-hand corner with a drop-down menu where you could change the resolution and the zoom ratio of your patcher. Down the bottom, we've got other important tools we'll come to later. For example, the lock tool or the padlock to allow you to lock the patch. We have presentation mode that allows you to set up graphical user interfaces. In short, there's a lot of different icons available around the patcher, which we often use during the creation of a patch. I'm going to simply close down the Format tab here, and we'll look a bit later at some of the side panel toolbar options over here on the right-hand side. This includes the inspector and the Macs console. So for now, let's simply move back to our slides and have a look at our next activity. We can see opening the Objects button will give us the Objects pane, and this contains all of the objects available in Macs. Macs is usually categorized into multiple families. We can see here Macs, which is the focus of this course, and these are objects that manipulate data. They manipulate numerical values. They do not produce audio or process any sound. The family of objects we can use for audio generation and processing is known as MSP, or Max Signal Path. The MSP objects have a tilde, or a wiggly line, at the end of each of their names, and this represents they're an audio generation or processing object. The Max objects do not have that wiggly line or tilde. They merely manipulate data. So we could use the Max objects, for example, to build a MIDI step sequencer. In fact, that is one of the outcomes of this course. We can also see other families available in the objects pane, such as the Max for Live category. Now these objects pretty much mostly begin with the expression live dot, and they represent the objects that are designed to provide compatibility with Ableton Live's ecosystem. So if you have a full license of Max, you can use Max for Live devices in your Max patches, or if you have a copy of Live Suite, you will have Max for Live as standard in Live Suite, which allows you to build Max for Live devices in Max, which you can use in the live sequencing domain. There are many other families of Max within our objects pane. For example, there is the Software Development Kit, SDK, where you can write your own objects in C. It's quite an advanced topic. We've also got Node for Max, which is a new feature for Max 8. This allows you to integrate Node JavaScript code. So there's many different families in the objects. One of the other large families is Jitter, which provides visual manipulation to be able to do some visual AV installation work or maybe VJ applications. So for now, let's just go back to the search tool. We're going to select the all category and we're going to move up to our search box at the top. So the search is contextual. We have to have the all category object selected for our search to work through every family. Let's move back to our PDF slides. So the next slide, 6, talks about being able to search for an object called playlist within the all category. So let's come back to Max, make sure we're in all, and simply type in the word playlist into the search box. We can see every object with the name playlist appears in the search term. We have a Jitter playlist object. We have an object called mc.playlist tilde, which is a multi-channel audio object. And we have another object at the bottom, which is the basic playlist for audio, playlist tilde. Let's click and drag an instance of the playlist object out into our patcher. We can see we've just created a playlist object by dragging and dropping it from the objects pane in the toolbar. Super easy. Let's move back to our slides and we can see our next slide here describes the aspect of dragging the playlist object out into the patcher. Let's move on to slide 8 and we can see we now have our playlist object centered somewhere in our patcher. So very easy to grab an object from the objects pane. Often you need to know the object you're looking for, but that's one of the joys of learning Max, is to learn more about the objects so you can actually define which one you want when you're building your patch. Let's move on to slide 9. Now let's have a look at this one. We can control click or right click to open a contextual menu. So when you've created an object, there is a contextual menu for every object, which you can access by control clicking or right clicking. And you see this drop down menu appears with many options. Let's move back to Max and have a look. If we right click on our playlist, we can see our top option is our playlist help. So this gives us a quick insight into the Max help system. Every object has a contextual menu when you control or right click, and the top option is always the help file. Let's open the playlist help. This opens a new patcher, which is actually the help for playlist. And what's interesting about this is it's a really good resource to learn more about the objects. We can see here quite a lot of description here about some of the different functions of this playlist object. This is an object that allows you to play different sound files within different lanes. We've also got multiple tabs up the top of the help file, which will give us further insight into other functions available for the object. Some objects have multiple tabs in the help, some might only have one. But it's worth exploring the help for any new objects you come across in Max, and we'll talk about this a bit more later today. Let's come back to the basic tab and visit back to our PDF slides. So now we've opened the help for playlist. We can see here we have multiple bits of information here we could use to learn about our object. But what we really want to do is click on the button in the bottom right hand corner of the toolbar. This will activate the audio engine. So this allows us to configure the audio driver for your installation of Macs to ensure it's conformed to the correct audio device you want to use so you can hear some audio. Let's visit Macs again. We can see here in the bottom right hand corner is the audio on-off button. When you hover over it, you have a rollover help. Currently, mine is active, it's blue. We can switch it on and off via that button. And as you might notice, when you switch it off and on, the speaker object, which is actually known as the Easy DAC object, also becomes activated. So there's multiple ways to activate the audio driver for your patch. You could use an object that represents a speaker, which we'll explore later, or you could use the main on and off driver button within every patch in the bottom right hand corner. Let's move back to our slides. The next page, 11, is asking us to visit the options menu and select audio status. This is the location of Mac's audio preferences. So back into Macs, back into the options drop-down menu. Let's visit audio status, and we can see a floating window appears. Inside this window, we can configure the driver you want to use on your system. On Mac, most likely it will be Core Audio. On Windows, it could be, for example, ASIO. Once the driver has been selected, you then have a different option for your input device or your output device. So much like any DAW, such as Ableton Live, you have an audio preferences pane where you can configure to use your audio device, whether that's a Focusrite Sapphire sound card or an Ovation Audio Hub, for the input and the output of the software. So this is very similar to the audio preferences in Live, Logic and Pro Tools. In this example, my output device is my Telestream audio capture because I'm using Telestream ScreenFlow to make this recording. So you probably want to set this to an appropriate setting for your system. That could be the built-in output, which might represent the headphones plugged into the side of your computer, or maybe you might have a more specific audio interface from a manufacturer like Focusrite. So once this is configured successfully, we can really leave it set forever. We can also see here we have issues of sampling rates and buffer size, which Max calls a vector size. In my example, I'm using 48K for my sample rate due to the screen capture. You could set this to a different value that your audio interface is capable of handling, i.e. 44.1K, 48K, 96, etc. So let's visit back to our slides and see our next activity. So page 12 is just describing here about the configuration of your output device. This needs to be set for you to hear any sound from Max. Let's move on to slide 13. And we can see here, this is simply an example of triggering a sound in the playlist help file to be able to hear something. And we can use the different playhead buttons in the help to trigger a piece of audio to ensure that we've actually got audio working on our setup for Max today. So let's visit Max again. I'm going to close down the audio status window. And just to be safe, I'm going to bring down the volume of the fader at the bottom here, just to avoid any really loud audio. I'm going to press play on one of these playheads. We can see this particular lane is a drum loop, and it actually has the cycle activated. So if I deactivate the loop or cycle button, we just get one playthrough. Now this particular playlist is only capable of playing one sound at a time. We can't trigger two playheads. So it's not truly multi-track. However, we can actually swipe across the playheads to choose a region inside the clip. For example, so there's quite a few things you can do with the playlist object to be able to play back different audio files one at a time from each playlist, but you have the option to select regions in a clip and loop different parts of the file. Let's move back to our PDF. So now we've managed to successfully play back some audio from Max by using the quick example of the playlist object. Let's move through to our next slide. So we can see here, by swiping over the different elements, we can create regions, we have a volume fader we can manipulate, we have a play button, we have a cycle. So there's quite a few things, again, you could use for playlist, and we're going to continue to develop ideas for the playlist in this session. So finally, there are two main volume stages we can manipulate in Max. You can see here we have the live.gain fader, which is representing a volume fader. And that is the volume of this particular playlist object. We also have a master gain volume fader in the bottom right-hand corner of every patcher, just above the blue audio status button. And this will provide gain staging for every object in your patch. This is the overall volume of Max itself, and any individual parts of your patch could have individual faders for gain staging. So there's a quick overview for you of getting some sound out of Max to be able to configure your AV settings successfully to pass audio. Let's move on. Let's have a look at another example here. On page 16, we can see how we can actually build a little playlist object. So the idea for this is an activity for you to try at home. What you can do here is follow slide 16, make some objects from the object toolbar, and be able to find a playlist, a live.gain, and an easy DAC object. And if you notice, these are all objects that have the tilde at the end of a name, so it represents an audio object. And we can actually patch and cable the devices together to create a simple playlist file. So have a go at this by yourself, and I'll be back in a second with the second part of the video to show you the solution for this activity. Good luck.